Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om 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 Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Shri Suvacha. Evam Etat Puru Pristo Evam Etat Pura Pristo Matreyo Bhagavan Kila Matreya Bhagavan Kila Kasatra Vanam Pravistena Satchavanam Pravistena Chakva Sva Graham Radhimat Tattva Sva Graham Radhimat Shri Suvacha Ivamita Paru Presto Matraya Bhagavan Kila Satravanam Pravistena Tyatva Svagraham Radhimat Sukuvacha Ivamita Paru Presto Matreyo Bhagavan Kila Kasatravanam Pravistena Chaktva Svagraham Radhimat. Others?
Shri Sukuvacha Evaneta Pura Prishto Maitreyo Bhagavan Kila Ravanam Pravistena Shatva Swagraham Radhimat.
Shri Sukuvacha
Evaneta Pura Prishto Maitreyo Bhagavan Kila Ravanam Pravistena
Shri Sukuvacha Ivameta Pura Prishto Maitreyo Bhagavan Kila Shatravanam Pravishtena Tyatva Svagriham Radhimat.
Translation. Sukadeva Goswami said, after announcing his prosperous home and entering the forest, King Vidura, the great devotee, asked this question of His Grace Maitreya Rishi. Please repeat. Sukadeva Goswami said, after announcing his prosperous home and entering the forest, King Vidura, the great devotee, asked this question of His Grace Maitreya Rishi. Text 2. Translation. What else is there to say about the residential house of the Pandavas? Sri Krishna, the Lord of everything, acted as your minister. He used to enter the house as if it were his own. And he did not take any care for Duryodhana's house. Purport. According to the Gaudiya Achintya Veda, Tattva Veda, philosophy, anything which satisfies the senses of the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, is also Sri Krishna. For example, Sri Vrindavan Dham is non-different from Sri Krishna, Tad Dhamma Vrindavana, because at Vrindavan, the Lord enjoys the transcendental bliss of his eternal potency. Similarly, the house of the Pandavas was also the source of transcendental bliss for the Lord. It is mentioned here that the Lord identified the house with his own self. Thus, the house of the Pandavas was as good as Vrindavan, and Vidura should not have given up a place for transcendental bliss. Therefore, the reason for quitting the house was not exactly family misunderstanding. Rather, Vidura took the opportunity to meet Rishi Maitreya and discuss transcendental knowledge. For a saintly person like Vidura, any disturbance due to worldly affairs is insignificant. Such disturbances, however, are sometimes favorable for higher realization, and therefore, Vidura took advantage of a family misunderstanding in order to meet Maitreya Rishi. Text 3. And the king asked Sukadeva Goswami, where and when did the meeting and discussion take place between Saint Vidura and His Grace Maitreya Muni? Kindly oblige, my lord, and describe this to us. Exactly as Shankarishi inquired of Sutta Goswami, and Sutta Goswami replied, so Srila Sukadeva Goswami replied to King Parikshit's inquiries. The king was very anxious to understand the meaningful discussion that took place between two great souls. Saint Vidura was a great and pure devotee of the Lord, and therefore his questions to His Grace Maitreya Rishi, to His Grace Rishi Maitreya must have been very purposeful and on the highest level, and approved by learned circles. Purport. Questions and answers among different classes of men at different value, and inquiries by mercantile men in business exchange cannot be expected to be highly purposeful in spiritual values. Questions and answers by different classes of men can be guided by the caliber of the persons concerned. In the Bhagavad Gita, the discussion between Lord Sri Krishna and Arjuna, the Supreme Person and the Supreme Devotee respectively, the Lord admitted Arjuna to be his devotee and friend, Bhagavad Gita 4.3. And therefore, any sane man can guess the discussion was on the topic of Bhakti Yoga system. Actually, the whole Bhagavad Gita is based on the principle of Bhakti Yoga. There's a difference between karma and karma yoga. Karma is regulated action for the enjoyment of the fruit by the performer. But karma yoga is action performed by the devotees for the satisfaction of the Lord. Karma yoga is based on bhakti, or pleasing the Lord, whereas karma is based on pleasing the senses of the performer himself. According to Srimad Bhagavatam, one is advised to approach a bona fide spiritual master when one is actually inclined to question from an elevated level of spiritual understanding. A common man has no interest in spiritual values, has no need to approach a spiritual master, just as a matter of following fashion. As a student, Maharaj Parikshit was serious about learning the science of God, and Sukadeva Goswami was a bona fide spiritual master in the transcendental science. Both of them knew that the topics discussed by Vidura and Rishi Maitreya were elevated, and thus Maharaj Parikshit was very interested in learning from the bona fide spiritual master. Text 5. Sri Sutta Goswami said, the great sage Sukadeva Goswami was highly experienced and was pleased with the king. Thus, being questioned by the king, he told him, please hear these topics attentively. Om Gyantimirandasya Gnananjana Shlakaya Chakshurmilitam Etasma Shigarema Shri Chaitanya Mara Vistam Chapatam Ninudle Svayam Rupakadarmayam Pratislavanakam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Taparkamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sajjatam Sarvaganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Savadvaitam Savrutam Krishna Sitam Krishna Chaitanya Shri Radha Krishna Pada Savanolita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Hey Krishna Kurna Sindhu Dino Bando Jagapate Gopisha Gopikanta Radha Kanta Namaste Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radha Vidam Nishri Vishwan Subidevi Haridanam Vikari Vancha Kalpatu Vyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhivcha Pita Nam Pabhibyo Vaishnavu Namo Namaha. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming to Srimad Bhagavatam. We hear the words of the pure devotee who make great spiritual advancement, and also in conversing and trying to understand these. So we hear and we see this is that that these are questions, these are relevant questions that are been putting forth. And Parikshit Maharaj is asking these particular questions, and Sukadeva Goswami is narrating, and he's talking about the great souls of asking relevant questions. And so, for human beings in general, everyone's always asking questions at every moment. It's the types of questions that a person is asking. People are asking, how will I survive in this material world? How I find happiness? How I find success? And one of the problems in the material world, though, sometimes people are asking the wrong questions. You're not trying to find what the ultimate answers to those questions in life are. But it is by nature of human beings to question everything. And questioning is very relevant to understand one's position. And we can understand that one of the, one could say, the positive effects of tragedies or difficulties in the material world is automatically people question things, right? We can understand even such a great tragedy like, say, 9/11, when 9/11 happened. Everyone, whether you were a transcendentalist or non-transcendentalist, the materialists, so many types of people were asking questions. Why is this happening? Why me? And I think many people, when they have difficulties happening in life, they're trying to inquire, why is this happening to me? So this can be a very good thing in a sense, is that we try to understand this world around us in such a way. This is very important. And so one of the problems, though, is that when this sometimes only lasts for a certain amount of time. Usually, even we find even during 9/11 is when these very awful things had happened. People were questioning for a long time, but then afterwards, after some years, people kind of put those questions behind them and went on with their regular everyday habits of trying to live in this material world. But if as the examples given here, this is a very important dialogue that Parikshit Maharaj, even though he was a very powerful person, very highly intelligent, very highly skilled, came to the humble position of asking a great saint like Sukadeva Goswami. And Sukadeva Goswami was giving him those answers. I think this is also important too. Sometimes I think, I don't actually remember the exact dialogue, but in the sense that I think at one time, the idea is that people are always questioning things. And naturally this is a good thing, but one has to also be ready to take the answers to the questions. And this was the beauty and the wonderful thing about Srila Prabhupada, is that Prabhupada gave, as he says in Bhagavad Gita, he gives Bhagavad Gita as it is. And sometimes we may not be ready for particular answers to questions because it may be an austerity to the mind, or maybe a little bit difficult. I'm sure when Prabhupada started talking about following the regular principles, this is particularly at that time in the late 60s, early 70s, and the counterculture was huge, and it was quite a large fashion to be a countercultural hippie type person. That when Prabhupada was saying no intoxication, this is a great challenge to to many people at that time. Many people were engaged in this type of activity. But Prabhupada, just like any good physician, he gives the patient what they need. Now, the patient may not necessarily want to take the medicine, but the doctor knows this is what will heal the patient. And so the doctor finds the best way in order for the patient to get healthy. So similarly, that Srila Prabhupada is the transcendental physician in giving us the knowledge and to actually perfect our lives. So the point remains is that one should be ready to take answers to the questions that we have. And it's not that we continually just always ask questions, but we should be ready to follow the answers that are given. And the answers here in Srimad Bhagavatam are actually given. And this is why it's so important to continually read these, read Srimad Bhagavatam. We may be in Krishna consciousness for some time, or maybe even a short time. But we have to constantly be reading Srimad Bhagavatam and trying to apply this to our lives and to try to understand how do we not become influenced by the modes of material energy. The modes of material energy are so strong and they're so subtle in so many types of ways that we can't even realize it sometimes. It's a very subtle thing. Sometimes we can come to Krishna consciousness. I've seen this many times. And I remember in particular, there's this, when I joined in Florida, there was this devotee. He had joined, I think he joined very early. He was like maybe 16 when he joined, and he was from Hungary. And he had joined, and he joined in England, and he stayed in the temple there. And and I remember he had come to Florida. He was only like maybe 26 at the time. And he'd already been a devotee 10 years, and he was 26. And he was very fired up. And I remember we did a maha cleanup of the temple, and he would clean every inch, and he was like really puckered and very fired up. And then he would actually even go outside on top of the roof and clean the windows on the outside, right on the roof. And he was very puckered in some ways. He gave very nice classes, and he was very good at kirtan, and he was a very serious devotee. But one of the problems is that sometimes when devotees from other countries come to America, they can be overpowered by the financial freedom that a person can experience by being here. There's so many opportunities to enjoy the material nature financially in so many types of ways. So he's kind of barraged his mind in so many types of ways. And it was kind of a gradual thing as he started kind of coming out of Krishna consciousness that, he kind of moved outside, and then he would come to classes every day, and then he'd come to classes once a week, and then you didn't see him that much, and then sooner or later he ended up, he kind of fell out of Krishna consciousness, and he joined the military. He got his green card, and he joined the military. He was in the Iraq War, and then he had totally left Krishna consciousness. And I remember I was a Facebook friend with him, and I posted something about animals being killed or slaughtered or something like that. And there's this kind of big debate, and he actually got in a debate, and he was actually kind of debating me against why I was putting this video up, and that and I was kind of thinking well, why would he even be even questioning me on this particular type of thing? And then I come to realize is that he's probably not even a vegetarian anymore. And that's really what came down to it. And I think eventually he unfriended me, and he said that I needed to go back to the university, and I didn't know what I was talking about. And he knows so much more than me because he's been in the university and the military and so many things. And he just unfriended me. And then it was interesting. I had seen him when I was in Alachua a few years later, and he was so happy to be in association with devotees. He was so happy to be at the temple because he said he was so far removed from the temple in so many ways, and that he actually went to Iraq, and he was a medical soldier that would go out there and take care of the soldiers and things of that nature. And he said that when he was in Iraq, he had never experienced such a hellish place on earth, and being there, particularly during a war, and being so poverty-stricken, and him seeing so many gross types of things. And he said he couldn't be further removed from Krishna or God than if he really tried. You think if in the place that he was at that time and experiencing things he was experiencing, he really didn't think a God existed because he couldn't believe experiencing what he was experiencing. But he had been through so many difficulties and struggles and for that. And then he actually was coming back to the temple, and he was so grateful to be back at the temple, being around the devotees and seeing the beautiful deities in the Latva and in so many ways. And he said that he had experienced so much suffering in so many particular ways that he actually had a sense of relief of being there and actually was coming back to Krishna consciousness. So in one sense, that was kind of needed for him to actually have some more appreciation of devotees. This is not recommended for anyone out there, and don't try this at home. But the idea is that he was experiencing material nature, and he thought he could try to enjoy the material nature, but Maya had other plans for him, and he regained his intelligence and he came back to Krishna consciousness. And so similarly for anyone in the material world, despite whatever difficulties or problems that a person has had, that if they continually come back to engage in Krishna consciousness, all hope is there. It's understood that even if one falls down, the idea is that one can fall on one's back. But if one falls on one's back, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it gives one the opportunity to get right back up. And so similarly, we should understand by these questions that's being narrated by Sukadeva Goswami about Vidura and Maitreya are relevant questions. And questions are very important, and again, that we should learn to accept the questions they're giving particular authorities, even if we may not think they are a little bit bitter at that time. But because we know ultimately that will be good for us. And this is the progressive way of how we can make actually advancement in spiritual life. We find that oftentimes this is the challenge for people that are going to a university, right? They will often say that I'm going to universities to study, to make a difference in the world, and I'm not just doing it for the money, but that I'm doing it to make a difference. And they have that kind of idealist perspective in some sense. But the problem is how society is made up, is that you may not be doing something for the money, but later on you have to pay for that. Even if one wants to do wonderful things in the material sense, even the mode of goodness activity, there's always a price to pay. And so the material world is set up in such a way that it makes it very difficult to do that. And so we can even understand that that the challenge in Krishna consciousness is that we have to constantly see what is to our best benefit. That everyone in this material world is struggling in particular type of ways, but the best way is to make progressive advancement in Krishna consciousness. By making this progressive advancement, we can actually perfect our lives. And ultimately we can help others in that process. That we can understand that, say even animals in this material world, that they're dictated pretty much by their senses. They just kind of are based on what they feel and do. And we similarly understand that the human being is very unique in the sense that they have the free will to choose whether they want to act on their senses or not. And this is actually a gift, and one could say a burden at the same sense. Because with that becomes a huge responsibility. And we have to take on that responsibility, but it also can be the responsibility for our liberation. But we can actually understand in the material world, as we can see in today's society, that the human being he misuses his intelligence and is guided by his senses. And this can actually be far more dangerous than any animal can do. And we can see in society that how much problematic that can be within the world. That there are so many leaders that are so, intoxicated by political power, by material power, that they're ready to even threaten the world with a nuclear arsenal We can see this now that there's a big threat with Iran and basically the world. We could even say it in Korea is in the same position. We see that Iran and America are kind of playing a little kind of proxy wars back and forth with, you know, one person attacking them, attack back and forth, and in the background. So this can be very dangerous, and we can see that this is a someone in that type of position is trying to lord everything that they survey. That I am the most important country, that therefore I will dictate things, and I have the ability to do so through nuclear power. So we see this is a big problem in society. And we see oftentimes people in positions of authority. We say sometimes police. They have a particular type of authority, and it's actually very needed in society. Without having proper authorities in society, a society can't run. But the problem is that it's not necessarily authority, which authority is important. We recognize in Krishna consciousness we have to have authorities. We have a system, a parampara system of guru, disciple, and the disciple must follow the guru. And the disciple that actually follows the guru, he actually becomes a guru, and he instructs the world. So we understand that authority is important. It's a very important thing. But the problem is if it's a misused authority. And we can see what happens just in the material world when authority is misused. Where we see this is sometimes we can see with the police sometimes. Sometimes police misuse their authority and they can abuse people in particular ways that can have profound effects on the world and the United States as we can see it. So I have to understand that if one has a particular authority, he also has a huge responsibility in acting in the best possible way. To show it as an example, I think Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj pointed out very rightly that if you criticize another person, make sure that you're following what you're criticizing. Make sure that if you're ready to criticize another person, be ready to 10 other people looking back at you. So one has to set the ideal example if one is an authority. And to one certain extent, that Srila Prabhupada has given us this opportunity that he's given to Srimad Bhagavatam. Shri Shri Jai Jai. Srila Prabhupada has given us this opportunity to authoritate the scriptures of Srimad Bhagavatam and giving us these answers and how to live our lives. So once we're exposed to this, we actually have a huge responsibility in following the proper example and how to actually guide society. This is what the Srimad Bhagavatam is meant for, is to help others on the path of spiritual liberation. Otherwise, one's life is basically spoiled. And we can see it many times. We see many young people, right? Many young people are starting out in their lives, and they have so much potential in their lives, but oftentimes they may spoil it through sense gratification. And we have to kind of point out the faults of sense gratification in the sense that it doesn't really make one happy. So when one actually thinks deeper about these subjects, oftentimes in society you can see that oftentimes people don't like people that think very deeply or even question things on mainstream society and how things are going. And so often people don't like this, and this is one reason why oftentimes people take intoxicants to numb them from the realities of the world, so they don't have to see the world as it is. But I think many people that come to Krishna consciousness, they are very deep thinkers, or at least they want to become deep thinkers. And these are very important questions and answers that are given here. It is giving us the answers to break free from the illusion of material existence. And we can understand that the super deep thinkers, the super transcendentalists, is not only above illusion, but they're positively attached to Krishna. And this is what the example of Sukadeva Goswami. That Sukadeva Goswami, as we understand, is he was only 16 years old. but he's a self-realized personality that is actually giving us these answers for pure devotional service. And that we should try to understand these concepts to make progressive advancement in spiritual life. And this is by a purifying process. That we understand that the Srimad Bhagavatam is not just a book of knowledge, even though it has many aspects of knowledge, to material, to spiritual, and so many aspects, but it's actually an instruction book to actually be followed. We have to constantly be following this through the simple process of chanting, hearing, remembering, by strictly following the regular principles of freedom. We understand these regular principles are actually regular principles of freedom. Oftentimes you can describe the regular principles to non-devotees in a particular type of way. But they may misunderstand these things as being kind of suppressive in particular ways. But we understand that they're actually the four regular principles of freedom. And we can actually see things as they are. We're not influenced by the material nature. And material nature is not dictating what we do in any particular way. So, and this is also by when we render devotional service.
Sorry, my phone just started playing this music.
That's okay. Everything happens for a reason. So Krishna put this music on, so one can make more purification than listening to me. But anyhow, we can understand that when we engage in favorable service, which is very favorable to Krishna, Krishna reciprocates. Krishna reciprocates to the devotee that's trying to engage in pleasing service. And this is the whole idea, is that the disciple is constantly trying to please the guru. And when the guru is pleased, we understand that Krishna is pleased. We say this is the connection of Guru Parampara. That Srila Prabhupada emphasized this. He said, Prabhupada, so many people said that Srila Prabhupada, you've done this, you translated books, you made so many disciples, you've done so many things. And Prabhupada was extremely humble. And all he said was, if I've done anything wonderful, it's that I strictly follow the orders of my spiritual master. So this is the secret to success. Now, if we simply follow the orders of Srila Prabhupada, of the Srimad Bhagavatam, all success is there. And it's not to say that that's a easy thing. It can be very difficult. But we say with anything worth of value in the material world, nothing comes easy, right? We can understand even for the materialists, they engage in so many activities of material success, but from an external point of view, you could even judge, you could say that it's amazing what they've done, and so they're just very lucky and very fortunate in that regard. And you can say to a certain degree that may be true, but one doesn't even understand the background and how much work a person's actually put into what they're doing to be highly successful. Very successful people, whenever they're engaged in a particular activity, they make it look like it's effortless. But we don't understand how many hours and years and decades that a person has put into becoming a highly successful person. So we should understand that this Krishna consciousness is actually the greatest value and actually the greatest benefit. And that the struggle may be there, but within that struggle, success will be there. One can't live in this world without struggle. You can either struggle materially or you can struggle spiritually. It's not that, okay, I don't want to follow this Krishna consciousness, I'm not into chanting, I don't want to follow the principles, too many rules, too many regulations. I'll just go out in the material world and it'll be easy out there. But it's not even easy in the material world. Everyone's struggling. Everyone's struggling for existence, right? We understand even, there's this conception sometimes we understand of even nature, right? People are always talking about, oh, nature is such a beautiful place and beautiful waterfalls and animals are so kind, and everyone's kind of thinking of maybe Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the birds just come up to you and they chirp to you and all these things happen. But no, we understand in the material world it's a hard struggle to survive. That every animal is actually fearful for its life. And every animal is kind of food for the other animal. And sometimes we even see our beautiful little cats outside there. And think, oh, they're very nice cats. I remember one time I was sitting out there taking breakfast, and I had my back towards the small little cat, and all the birds were over there. And all of a sudden, she jumps and grabs one of the doves by the neck, one of the big ones. And it just like takes off, and that's the end of it. Or sometimes I'll like walk up to them and they have all these feathers and they're like digesting some little bird. So we understand that there's hard survival that exists in the material world. We understand that oftentimes we'll see even like the eagles that are flying in air, they just come up and they'll pick up a little rabbit and just, it's gone. It's like dinner for that personality. So see, in nature, even in nature, it's a hard struggle for material existence. And this is the nature of the material world, whether you're in nature's beautiful scenes or if you're in the city, there's always going to be a struggle. And even in the material world, basically, it's the survival of the strongest. Whoever has the most wealth makes out in the end. So everyone's struggling to have that particular type of position. And it's even said that we can see in this pandemic that very wealthy people have actually benefited from it. Right? We see Amazon is one of the most successful companies in the world. And they're making a large amount of money due in the pandemic, where there's other people that they may be just working for restaurants and they're struggling just to stay afloat. So it's a hard struggle for material existence. So we shouldn't think that, this Krishna consciousness is very difficult, so therefore let me try to become a programmer, or let me just do something else. There's always going to be struggle. So better to struggle spiritually than to struggle materially, because there's no way of going around it. And if we understand this, and we understand that these questions are very relevant, and that we should always be asking questions, but we should also be ready to accept the answers. Once we are ready to accept these answers and apply them into our lives, can make great success on the spiritual path, and all hope is there. The only time that there's not hope in this material world is when we give up hope. And that's always everyone's free will to choose to do so. No matter how difficult this world is, one can always make a choice to make it better for oneself and others around them. But one has to have the proper mindset that we understand from Bhagavad Gita. I guess kind of broken record here, but there's the Bhagavad Gita 2, I think it's 2:14. What is it? What's the beginning? Matra sparshas kunteya shtashastu kutukata agmiyapyono netyastam titeksha svavarita. And O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearances that happens in the trust are just like the due course in time, are like the summer and winter seasons. They rise out of sense perception, O sign of Bharta, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So we can understand that there will always be difficulties in the material world, but if we are Krishna conscious, we can actually go above them. And it's not that in the material world sometimes we may think that I'm practicing Krishna consciousness and therefore nothing should happen to me. Like God's protecting me. And God is protecting everyone. But we should understand, even for the transcendentalists, it's not that material things or he doesn't have difficulties or challenges. It's that even though despite those challenges, difficulties, he can overcome them because he's Krishna conscious, that he's totally secure in a position. And it's all about the proper mindset. Like I remember Radhanath Swami describing about Bhakti Tirtha Swami and his Bhakti Tirtha Swami's last days. And Bhakti Tirtha Swami had very serious stages of cancer, so much in the sense that he had to cut off his limbs, and it was a great material struggle for him. And Radhanath Maharaj was asking one particular situation where he actually had a group of students come and he was giving a class, and even despite his difficult situation, Bhakti Tirtha Swami was appreciated these students, and they left. And the students were really like, it was their first time with contact with Krishna consciousness, but they were very inspired when they left. And everyone was inspired by the whole situation. And Radha Maharaj was explaining to him, like, I kind of asked him, like, how is it that you're so, you're so positive in this difficult situation? And he was stating that in this great adversity and this difficulty, it's actually given me the highest bliss in Krishna consciousness that I'm able to give Krishna to others. Despite this condition, Krishna has given me this opportunity to actually surrender more to the process. And because of that, he left in a very blissful way, despite this material situation. So, at any rate, if there's any questions or comments or criticisms?
Well, you were talking about hope, don't give up hope, So one time this man dropped a mouse inside of this bucket of milk, and everybody said, oh, he's just going to give up, he's just swimming around that thing, he's going to drown. But no, he kept swimming, he turned it into cream, and then he turned it into butter, and then he walked out of that. So never give up hope.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. There's actually an interesting situation, I think I can remember the story, is that one time this shoe company sent a man to Africa to sell shoes. And he went there, and he said, well, like, no one's wearing shoes. Like, who's going to buy shoes? It's like, this is useless. I can't do this. He calls back to his boss and says, I can't do this. No one wears shoes. So I'm not going to sell shoes. And so he left, and he sent another person there. And same thing happened. And then the other salesman saw, oh, no one's wearing shoes. Like, this is a great opportunity. No one is wearing shoes, so I'll be able to sell shoes to everybody. And he sat back and he called back and said, this is a great opportunity, thank you. I have this opportunity to sell shoes to everybody. So generally, the material mind can give us so many excuses why we can't succeed or why there's a difficult position of so many reasons, so many excuses. But it's with the proper mindset and actually looking for the opportunity even in the most difficult situation. And so, yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.